Thank you for listening to Footnotes, a Fellowship Mosaic podcast. This is a space for us to dig deeper into Scripture, what is happening in our community and culture, and continue the conversations we start on Saturday nights. We're excited to have you join us as we pursue truth, holiness, and redemption together.
Hey everybody, welcome to Footnotes. It's Noetz, and I'm here with Jen.
Hey everybody.
Jen, how many times have you been on Footnotes?
Twice.
Whoa.
I know. It's a big deal.
Have I been on you with all? I've been on definitely one of them.
Yeah, I've only done it with you. Yes. I think this needs to be part of our...
Yeah, this is our friendship.
Our friendship and part of our monthly rhythm of that we just do a Matt and Jen podcast.
Yes. Yes, I won't forecast what we're doing this summer. It's going to be exciting.
Yeah.
Well, hey, it's good to be with y'all. We finished our big 1 Corinthians series, spent all last semester and this semester really diving into this letter. And, man, we've pulled at a lot of threads. One of the threads we pulled at was women's roles in the church, and that conversation is open right now. We've kind of asked for listener questions, so if you're wanting to get something in and wanting us to visit that in a future episode, you can still do that. You can text me if you got my number, and I'll add it to the list, or you can email Mosaic at fellowshipnwa.org, and we can even use the voice message if you give us permission for that. So we'd love to have that in the future there. I believe, Lord willing, next week, Mark Schatzman and I are sitting down to record finally. So we're excited about that. And then the other conversation that was really helpful, or the passage that's really famous, is this passage out of the chapter 15, where Paul is just talking about the hope of the resurrection in the face of death. And he says this near the end. He says, listen, I tell you a mystery. This is verse 51 of chapter 15. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed. In a flash, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed. For the perishable must clothe itself with the imperishable, and the mortal with immortality. When the perishable has been clothed with the imperishable, and the mortal with immortality, then the saying that is written will come true. And I think this is such a quoted passage, especially in the context of funerals and memorials and situations of grief like that. It says this, then the saying that is written will come true. Death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God, He gives us victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. And so as we worked through that, we noticed that just in the body of Mosaic that there was a handful of hard stories, unexpected deaths, and so the kind of revisiting the question or the conversation of grief felt like something to do, even especially on this week that we're recording, where we just celebrated. Even that feels like the wrong word, but we just gathered for Palm Saturday and kind of mourned what the breaking of Jesus's body and the spilling of his blood, the pain of that, what that looked like, and then we're awaiting the resurrection that really fulfills that hope that's discussed there in 1 Corinthians 15. So wanted to bring Jen in on this one. Sorry for that kind of elongated intro there, but wanted to bring her in because, Jen, you're trained chaplain. You've done that as your other job, your second job, maybe your first job. This is your second? I don't know. But you've done it as another one of the ways that you bless people in the body of Christ. And so maybe just give us a brief overview again of what chaplaincy was and what grief training was in there, and then we can get into some of the weeds here.
Basically, chaplaincy is being a non-anxious, non-judgmental, comforting presence in the middle of grief, trauma, and crisis. And I know that's the clinical definition, but that's what you're doing. It's a very intimate space that you get to be with somebody in their darkest hour.
So you said a non-anxious presence.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to kind of pick into that a little bit.
Which is really kind of, there's always some level of anxiety. I think it's a matter of like, you are not overwhelming the space with your anxiety.
Yeah.
You're not letting it project into the space.
Yeah.
You have some kind of control over it.
Yeah. So there's a way to, I'm assuming you've been in some pretty uncomfortable conversations, or some pretty difficult moments, and those weren't situations that you would have wished on anybody,
Right?
And so something wells up in you. What's the instinctive response when you get the text, the call, the email saying, I just found this out, or this just happened? How's your body respond?
Well, my ears get hot and I get this really sick feeling in my stomach that I'm like, okay, I may get sick right now. Like my body feels that right away. And I think it sometimes comes from a place of, in all honesty, a little bit of, I'm afraid, but also some, I think, just pride and selfishness, because I make it about myself. How am I going to respond? What am I going to do? And I need to take a moment to kind of process that, which is good. I think we all need to take moments. Never just rush into a situation. You need to take some time to take some deep breaths and give yourself a moment. And then there's still going to be that level of fear, because you want to be there for those people and you don't want to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. But I think that is part of being human, the humanity part, and wanting to be there for the situation that we've been called into, and our people. And you're going to respond differently if it's with people that you know and love versus strangers.
Yeah. And so you acknowledge, I am going to feel anxiety. I am going to be anxious, and I'm walking into a situation where that is not needed. And so what are the whether it's down the hallway, you're just like, I'm walking from my office to somebody else's office to have a hard conversation, or whether it's, I'm driving from here to the hospital or whatever else to sit with somebody. What's going through your mind? What are you how are you engaging the Lord? What are you kind of rehearsing? What are you thinking, saying, praying? Just what moves you from anxious, acknowledging that, feeling that, to I can represent something else in this space?
I think that's a good question. Let me think about that. Again, those are, I guess I would process it those are two different situations. So like walking down the hall to somebody that I know, even having a hard conversation, you're asking certain questions because you're wanting feedback, and you're going to approach that differently versus walking into a hospital situation where having conversations are not necessarily needed. Yeah. You have to find out certain information so you know what you may be walking into. But a lot of times it is if learning the skill of reading the room and reading the, sensing the environment and reading people, their facial expressions, their body language, their tone. And I mean, you're walking in already knowing who Jesus is, but you're needing to know who they are. Yeah. And you for like a hospital situation, I would introduce myself. Yeah. And they would acknowledge you, and maybe I would say, tell me who you are. They would introduce themselves. And from there, I could basically, I'm just saying, I'm so sorry for your loss or your pain that you are feeling. And there needs to be nothing else but said for me, but other just being there with them.
Yeah.
And I think to kind of really answer that question, since like a conversation in the hallway, you are having an interaction, but whether it's a hospital situation or being called to, hospice or a family, or you're sitting with a family in hard times, it's just ministry of presence.
Yeah.
And so you're sitting with them, you're being with them in that moment. And that is a very intimate space, because they're not going to remember what you say most of the time, but they're going to remember that you were there. And I know we kind of talked about that before when we recorded a grief podcast. But so ministry of presence, we all have the availability to do that. I am not special. That's something that I got trained on. We all have the capability to do that. And because like sitting and listening and being with a family, a person, being able to listen, to understand, and not listen to have a reply. You're being there. And that doesn't mean that they won't ask you questions, or you're never going to say anything because you will.
Yeah.
But that you're not going in there with the agenda of, I have all the answers. I have the one thing I'm going to say is going to make them feel better. And they are going to stop crying or stop grieving, or, just feel so much better.
Yeah, you're not going to rescue them out of this moment.
Not going to rescue. You cannot. And even in that time, they may want to be evacuated from that despair, but that is not your job to do so. Your job is to be there with them. And I came across this saying that said, sitting with someone in a moment like that is you're sitting with somebody in the intersection of their mortality and their hardest sorrow. And that's a very tender place to be. And I think about how Jesus just sitting there and just being with us in those times, and we should follow his lead.
That's good. Yeah, there's a I mean, without you lyric that is coming to mind, because the way he delivers it, it's this kind of scream where he's yelling, it's a grief we've known before, but never quite like this. Never quite like this. It's just it builds in my body, and I think about that often when I think about the word grief. It's like the trained heart piece that comes up in me is like, whatever experience I'm bringing in, having known griefs myself and having walked with other people's in their griefs, I also have never been in this one with these people in this way. And so you're right that what you're doing is going, I have the training I have the experiences I have the Lord I know and trust, and I have the, just the spirit of compassion that can sit and try to take in what is happening here, and where might things that I know, instincts I have, things I could call back on, how might those come forward here, and where might I just need to just stuff those, leave them, and let the moment be what it is. So that's good. It reminds me, we've mentioned the bless principles from the stage a couple of times, but it's sort of a strategy for evangelism, and you start with B, you pray for the people, you're beginning with prayer for people that you would want to reach, and the L is listen, that you're like actively engaging and hearing what people are saying, and the way I've been saying it to others is you meet somebody over the fence and they say like, hey, I'm new, I just moved to Northwest Arkansas, had a nasty divorce out west and showed up here. They've just given you so many jump off points, and you could say, well, how do you like Northwest Arkansas, and miss all of them, or you can pull on any one of the threads. And the one I would want to pull is like, nasty divorce. Wow, that's hard. Like, what happened? How are you? When was it? And they might say, I'd rather not talk about it, and that's fine. You're not forcing anybody, but I've had the experience of having people be curious about me. And when they are, I feel very open about answering most questions, and very rarely feel interrogated or whatever fear I might bring to interactions. And the active listening piece of that is what you're talking about here too. So I don't mean to side trail into other stuff, but it felt poignant. So, so when you're listening, you're in that moment of grief. They have just lost the person they love. They are attempting to process what really is unprocessable in the moment. And in talking previously, you mentioned that this was kind of a first loss. What else would be wrapped up in that first loss? And first implies that there's a second. So carry us into the rest of that piece.
So, first loss, the loss of your loved one. Let's use that, your loved one. And then the secondary loss, which seems just as real, and it is a loss, and it can seem just as real as the first, but it is the missed things, the lost things, loss of physical touch, loss of inside jokes, loss of, laughter, loss of planning for the future and anniversaries and birthdays and grandkids and marriages that is what I see as a secondary loss that comes behind the first loss.
Yeah, infancy loss or pregnancy loss for me in this space is one of the hardest, because it is you don't have a lot of the stuff that would fall in the first bucket of like, I'm recalling all the things that are meaningful, and it's all unrealized hopes. I won't see you speak, walk, marry, all those pieces down the road that you hope for in the coming of a child. Have you ever read Sheldon Van Auken's A Severe Mercy?
No.
It was a book that Kara and I were really into when we were dating. It made it into our wedding vows and stuff like that. Pretty significant story. And it's been out long enough that I can tell some spoiler pieces of it. But they're a pagan couple who come to a deep love and decide to build a marriage that can't fail. And so they look all around at the world, and they see that when you buy something and it gets its first scratch, there's a fight there. So we're going to prevent that, because we're going to buy a car, and then we're going to walk outside and we're both going to hit it with a hammer. And then the first dent's already there, so nobody cares about the second one. They saw that children were a source of conflict in marriage, and so they were like, we're never having kids. They just had we saw that growing differences where I had an interest that you didn't partake in were a source of conflict. And so I'm going to learn to love the things you love, and you're going to learn to love the things I love, and we're going to try to find that middle ground of our Venn diagram and spend as much time there as we can. And really interesting concepts, interesting things. And what ends up happening is that Sheldon's wife gets ill and passes really young. And prior to that, she comes to a saving faith in Christ, and this impenetrable barrier has been ruptured from the inside now, because she now belongs to someone else. She's the Lord's, and he doesn't know what to do with this. And so then she passes of illness, and he's left wrestling with like, what do I do? And he starts to wrestle with the Lord and comes to his own saving faith. It's a really beautiful story. But he's the most methodical I've ever seen about working through the secondary losses, because he goes, we kept great journals. So he read back through the story of their life together and was like, we listened to this. So he would put an album on and he would listen to it. It's in entirety. And this is the first time that she's not here for this. So he just forced himself through every first. The first. Normally, it's the first birthday and the first holiday and the first anniversary of their loss and the first anniversary of your first date, and all the firsts come back around, and you are struck again and again. And then you're in a restaurant and you hear a song that was your song, and you go to a place and you find a meal that you had eaten together, and it's just that slow unpacking. But he just was like, he went to all the places, he met back up with all the people, he partook of all the media, he just was like very ruthless about, I'm going to make myself work through this grief. And I just found that really, it helped flesh out that secondary loss in a really concrete way for me, of like, it really, maybe he was threatened by the surprise of it or something. Because I noticed for me, it never makes sense to me when I'm suddenly crying about someone who's been dead 10 years.
Yeah.
My grandmother Ruth was passed the summer that we were pregnant with my daughter Ruth, and so she never met Graham. And really beautiful woman, just loved her deeply. And I get surprised when there are fresh tears, because I would think that that life would have returned to normal, and that's not the case. And so I'm just compelled by his his resilience to go, I'm gonna dig in and just do the thing, fight my way through it. So
what's the name of that book again?
A Severe Mercy, by Sheldon Van Auken. He's actually pen pals with C.S. Lewis. So the book has a series of like letters from Lewis and Sheldon, back and forth. And it's a pretty great book. Anyway, as you consider you're out of the moment, you're out of the like first crisis of loss, whatever it is, the funeral has come and gone, or the they're making their way through. What does non-anxious presence look like over a long haul for you?
What does it look like? I guess, honestly, I think that's something that for me anyway, I have to lay down daily. And once those first, like the funeral, like you said, the funeral is over, but things are going back to quote unquote normal everyday life. And it seems like life is going on, the world is going on, but I constantly think about my people that I'm walking with, and the world is not going on for them in the same way. And it can hurt whenever you are thinking, oh, they're getting, they're buying groceries and getting gas and going to concerts, like no big deal. And I just lost the love of my life, or I lost a grandparent, and I think about those moments, not to project on them, but it helps me be with them, helps me put that in that perspective for them. Yeah. So then I can move on into that, just being a comforting presence for them and just being with them, and moving on from not just being the ministry of presence and being with them, but checking in on them, and whether that's a phone call or a text, or setting up, can I come by and bring a meal? And I guess that would be kind of like the eating part of Bless.
Yeah, that's good.
And even serving them in a tangible way, because mentally and emotionally and physically they're drained. They don't have the energy to do so.
Yeah.
And letting them kind of, take their lead on that as much as you can, of how much and how long to be there in that same way, because it will evolve over time, and it will ebb and flow. And I was just thinking about this example you gave of the book, of him, like, I'm pushing through of this grief, going to be very like, I'm checking all the boxes, and I'm like, how can you force your way through grief and move through that? That would be, I think I'm gonna have to we may have to do a podcast about that later because I'm processing it because I don't think that's a healthy possible way.
Yeah.
Because we are surprised by what, like you said, why am I, 10 years later and I'll have this moment and I shed a tear. And I think about even when Jesus, when he heard Lazarus died, and he cried. I mean, he knew all, right? And then he knew what was to come and how he was going to raise him from the dead. And he knew why that was going to happen and all that. But he didn't get in a hurry. Like, I don't know that he was in a hurry to push through any of those types of, and maybe I'm projecting here, but I'm just thinking about that. Anyway, that probably is a tangent, and that really didn't answer your question maybe on, like, what do I do next? And I think there's not an exact formula.
Sure.
Is what I'm feeling. And because, yes, there are certain things I do for who I am, my temperament, my personality, and how I love people. But if you use the outline of as much as you can, a non-anxious, non-judgmental, comforting presence, and it's in an intimate place where you're sitting with people, you are listening to understand and not have a reply. I think those are kind of like you have your relationship with Jesus, that's the foundation, and then above that is this, like, the building blocks on that. I think then you go into how you love people. If you take those things, understanding, listening to understand, and comforting presence, Matt is not going to care for people in their time of crisis and grief the way Jen is. And I wouldn't want you to. I think that's going to look a little different in how you walk with people.
Yeah, that's good.
And I do think the bless will be great with that. If people who are like, I know I need a 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
About how to do that. It's, Scripture says, do not be anxious. And it's like, okay, well,
yeah.
Telling me not to be anxious is like, tell me not to like chocolate. It's not going to happen. And so but it is being aware, and exercising that muscle of being self-aware and not projecting that anxiety onto the people that you are caring for. I mean, the Lord gave us emotions and feelings, and they're indicators, but we are not supposed to be let out by them 100% of the time. They're indicating what's going on. And so then we need to process, okay, what do I do next to sit with the people that I know or don't know in crisis, or people who have their hope in Jesus or don't have their hope in Jesus. They're still human, and they're still an image bearer of God. And so if we can see them in that way, I think that will help. That goes a long way.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, thinking about that chapter 15 passage, in some way, the ministry of a non-anxious, non-judgmental, comforting presence, of listening to understand and not to reply, is an effort to bring about the presence of Christ into a circumstance where people might not feel how tangible he is. Yeah. And it's attempting to be that tangible but put on flesh expression of that in that space. Yeah. And so in some part, your ministry of presence is an answer to the sting of death, that it's still people, when they are feeling the sting of death, which I think we all do. I think the passage was clear that we're awaiting a day when death is put away for good, and none of us feel it. And we know that the person who has passed is free and clear from the sting of death any longer. But the rest of us who are grieving a lost one, a loved one who is not with us and who won't be with us again until we see them on the other side, that tension, getting to sit with people and be some piece of death's sting being softened, of taking some part of that sting onto ourselves. I mean, that feels like the reflection even for Easter is that he's taken onto himself the fullness of death's sting that we might not ever have to. So, you know what the final word?
I was just thinking, I don't know if I'm allowed to say.
Don't say it.
Like these
just
shows
kidding.
that you watch. It's a little known show that people watch a lot about the life of Jesus right now. Am I allowed?
King of Kings?
Yeah. No.
That movie, it's out.
Yeah.
Charles Dixon.
No.
Talks about, it's a cartoon Jesus.
Oh, I've seen that. I have not.
You're talking about The Chosen.
Yeah.
Go for it, girl.
I don't know. Yeah, The Chosen. And, people have mixed reviews about that. And we started watching it again recently just to finish it out. And there was a storyline where Simon and his wife Eden had a miscarriage, and it shows him walking through that, and it leads to the story where Jesus calls him out onto the water, Yeah. And then there's when in this particular show, Thomas has a lady that he's courting and wants to marry, but she gets killed, and Simon is, he's wanting to. Simon Peter, he is the one, the disciple that really gets on my nerves. But that's probably also a different podcast. Anyway, there's probably something about him that probably okay. But basically, Jesus is telling him, there's nothing that you need to say. You don't need to tell him, this is how you did it, and this is how I was feeling. And he's just telling him, Simon, go sit with Thomas. Just be with him. You don't have to say anything. And I think he told him that a couple of times, like in this particular episode. And I was like, yeah, Simon, just go sit with him. And you don't have to talk. And so I know that was a storyline in The Chosen. But I even giggled because I was like, oh, Lord, thank you for just reaffirming that through this episode, that just ministry of presence, that Simon wasn't there to fix it for Thomas because he was hurting greatly. And they were walking with Jesus, and Jesus is their hope. And so anyway, I don't know that. I was just thinking about that as you were talking.
No, it's good. Yeah, there's flesh on that story for sure. We get to see it lived out or see it acted out. That's powerful. So,
and there's free advertising for The Chosen. So there you go. Yeah. Dallas Jenkins. There you go.
Man, you're not getting any cut of that, I guess. All right. Well, Mosaic, it's good to be on the other end of this thing, and for those who are in that season now of deep grief, God's really good and near, even if you feel far away or wrecked by it. And there's a lot of folks here that want to be around you too. So thanks. And I guess one last push for listener questions, if you want to get those in between now and I think I record next Thursday, which is the 24th of April. So if you want your question, any chance of them being answered, I can't even promise that we're going to answer any of them, but we'll try to do what we can. And Mosaic at fellowshipnwa.org to get those in. Otherwise, go in peace. We love you. See you.